Welcome to the Center Square Radio Hour for the final weekend of April 2025. I'm your host, Chris Krug. The Center Square and the Radio Hour projects of the Franklin News Foundation, a 501c3 independent nonprofit nonpartisan news service. Established in 2019, the Center Square Newswire publishes original taxpayer-centric straight news that focuses on the size, scope, and effectiveness of local, state, and federal government. On the Center Square Radio Hour, our journalists explore their top stories, adding insights to the headlines. We'll also present thoughts on the economy from Dr. Orphe Divounguy, PhD economist. Today, we'll look at the latest data from the Center Square's Voters' Voice poll. We'll hear about the Department of Government Efficiency, their latest actions and upcoming changes. And we'll discuss how drug spending for California's state healthcare program has doubled since 2018. We'll be right back with all that and more in the Center Square Radio Hour.
He ran for state office and was beaten. Started a business and failed. Ran for Congress and lost. But thankfully, Abraham Lincoln didn't give up. Persistence. Pass it on. From the Foundation for a Better Life at values.com.
Welcome back to the Center Square Radio Hour. I'm Chris Krug with more on the Center Square's Voters' Voice poll. It's our Dan McCaleb.
President Donald Trump marks his 100th day of his second term in office on Wednesday, April 30th. With that occasion in mind, the Center Square this week launched its latest Voters' Voice poll, surveying more than 2,500 registered voters across the U.S. about how they think the president is doing on issues such as the economy, border security, the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, and more. Joining me to discuss this is Casey Harper, Washington, D.C. Bureau Chief for the Center Square. Casey, the Center Square has published a couple of stories off the poll results, and more stories will be published at thecentersquare.com in the coming days and week. What are your takeaways?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really interesting poll, giving a clear insight into how voters feel, in particular registered voters, about the Trump administration and how he's doing so far. And so I think some top-level takeaways is that, the president still generally has the American people's trust when it comes to the topic of immigration. I wrote about that at thecentersquare.com. Of course, he's been pretty aggressive. He's faced a lot of pushback in the courts that have sort of slowed his progress, the president's progress. But generally, Americans are behind the president on immigration. They haven't, abandoned him at all. And of course, that was one of the main things he was elected on. So according to our poll, 47% of those surveyed say that federal immigration policy has gotten better compared to only 32% who say it's gotten worse. So that's a 15-point spread, a 15-point advantage for it improving, saying that immigration policy has improved versus those who say it's gotten worse. Now, if you take those who say there's been no change, you get up to 60%. People who say it's either gotten better or there's been no change, it's 60%. There is a small contingent that say that Trump is not acting aggressively enough. They want basically people kicking down doors and bombing the cartels and, taking really aggressive measures. And so in their mind, it's not that they oppose Trump from a leftward position, it's that they think he's not being aggressive enough. But so the people who want Trump to keep doing what he's doing on immigration, or maybe even to go harder, I think, will be over half of the country. And so that's a big takeaway. Now, however, many other issues for the president do not look nearly as good. In particular, the economy. The economy, and inflation are what helped Trump get elected. But right now, about 37% of voters in our poll approve of Trump's handling of the economy, compared to 54% who either strongly disapprove or somewhat disapprove. So Dan, he's underwater on his handling of the economy. You have to imagine that goes back to tariffs, because inflation has actually been pretty good since Trump took office. The inflation numbers are good. The jobs numbers are not bad at all. Inflation, I think, or rather tariffs, is really what this comes down to.
Yeah, and it's I was going to ask that, Casey. It's really about the uncertainty of the tariffs. When earlier this month, Trump put in place the reciprocal tariffs on dozens and dozens of foreign countries, Europe, Asia, Africa, etc. And stocks tanked pretty much over the next couple days. And then when he lifted those tariffs about a week later, stocks rose again. So I get what the President Trump is trying to do. He's using the tariffs as a negotiating tactic to get better trade deals with the other countries, but that is going to take time. And with what's been happening with the stock market and the uncertainty over the tariffs and the concerns about what it's going to mean for American businesses, that certainly has weighed on voters.
Right. I mean, the whole main part of the pitch of tariffs is that it will kind of fundamentally reshape the American economy at home over time by reinvigorating and recreating an industrial base, a manufacturing base, because businesses will have incentives to build factories in the U.S. and start making things in the U.S. again. But building a factory and starting to produce something is going to take years and years. I mean, this is something that would not really take effect until after Trump leaves office. Now you could see maybe some small gains, maybe people revamp factories quickly or they expand their existing production in the U.S. But to see a wholesale remaking of sort of industrializing the U.S., I think you can make a strong argument for it. You can make a national security argument that we're too reliant on China for our pharmaceuticals, for instance, when we're possibly going to go to war with them over Taiwan. That, shouldn't we make a certain percentage of our ships here in the U.S., which we basically don't do at all, if we want to be secure nationally. So there's a lot of strong arguments for boosting domestic manufacturing. But as you said, it takes a lot of time. And right now the markets and the political cycles work in very short time frames. Traders, there's quarterly reports. These companies have to have their earnings calls. Traders are working, by the minute. Just wait a decade for a wholesale change to the U.S. economy. I think it's a tough sell. It's going to take a lot of political backbone to make it happen. And then, separate from that is just this overall trade war with China, that we've seen, growing. China's shown a lot of resistance, a lot of sort of political will to go to the mat with us, which I think that's also spooking investors. And then, you can't discount just the general uncertainty of what will Trump do next? That's got to be baked in a little bit. You never know. At any given moment, he could announce certain tariffs are back. And I think that is spooking, investors.
Casey, I don't want to give too much away because we're still analyzing the polling data and working on additional stories. But briefly, let's stick with Doge. We also polled more than 2,500 registered voters on what they think of the Department of Government Efficiency. I know you're working on a story for the weekend about those poll results. Briefly share with listeners what you're seeing there.
Right. So we've seen that Doge has been highly controversial. And when you ask registered voters, basically, which of the following best describes your feelings towards these cuts? Either Doge is cutting too much, they're getting it just right, or they're not cutting enough. 47% say that they are cutting too much. 28% say they're getting it right, and 12% say they're not cutting enough. The rest are unsure. So if you want to group those together and say they're cutting too much, it's 47%. And then those who say they're doing it just right or they're not cutting enough, that would be 40%. So you have the plurality. Basically, it breaks down to 47 versus 40, and then a very large 14% that are not sure. I mean, if you look at the breakouts here, 75% of Democrats say Doge is cutting too much, whereas only 19% of Republicans say the same thing. So it's clear political bias here, political lines here. Obviously, Republicans want more cuts. Democrats say this is, out of control. There's been a lot of criticism over cutting U.S. aid, and there's so much talk about how Social Security is going to get cut, although I really think that's not going to happen. So right now there's some hesitancy against Doge, and Elon Musk is looking like he's going to take a step back. I guess Musk tried to take on the entire federal government, and right now it looks like the federal government may have won.
Thank you for joining us today, Casey. Listeners can keep up with all of the Center Square Voters Voice Poll stories at thecentersquare.com.
Thank you, Dan and Casey. You're listening to the Center Square Radio Hour. I'm your host, Chris Krug. With more on Doge, let's take it back now to Dan McCaleb.
Department of Government Efficiency leader Elon Musk said this week that he will be spending less time in Washington, D.C., focusing on finding waste, fraud, and inefficiencies in the federal government so he can focus more attention on Tesla, the electric vehicle company he founded. At the same time, other White House officials continue to say they are finding ways to cut bloat in their agencies. Joining me to discuss this today is Casey Harper, Washington, D.C. Bureau Chief for the Center Square. Casey, Elon Musk spending less time in Washington, D.C. He's been a controversial figure. What do you think that means for President Trump's efforts to cut waste and fraud in the government?
Yeah, I mean, I think Musk has largely been actually a shield for the president. President Trump's one of the most controversial politicians in modern history. And yet, in the first almost 100 days of his presidency, Democrats have spent most of their time attacking not the president, but Elon Musk. And so he's actually been very useful to the president. I think a lot of people are trying to characterize this as a massive loss. I think that Musk certainly didn't live up to his promises when it came to cuts. I think he was maybe just over optimistic about human nature and just how entrenched the bureaucracy really is in DC. But he did expose a lot of cuts, and he did have some big wins. We could talk about that. But more importantly, he's really given cover to President Trump as Trump has been rolling out. I mean, we're trying to keep up with it at thecentersquare.com, but he's signing executive orders almost every day. We're talking, maybe 20 a week. I mean, she's just rolling out all these policies so quickly that the media and the Democrats don't even have time to criticize all of them. And with what time they do have, they're talking about Elon Musk. The thing is, Musk isn't running for re-election. Musk isn't even really a Republican, or hasn't been. He's clearly sided with the Republicans recently. But, it's pretty easy, I think, for Trump and other Republicans to shed Musk like a coat, a useful coat in that season, that Musk go back to his companies. I think Musk will be able to recover from this. He'll get Tesla stock back up. He'll focus on his companies, and he'll be back on Joe Rogan in a year talking about how corrupt DC is and how difficult it was to do Doge because of that. And maybe he'll say a few things critical of President Trump, and he'll be kind of back in that weird, independent media space, not Republican or Democrat. And so I think he's going to be fine. I think it was good for President Trump, because all those attacks went on Musk, and now he can kind of go into the next phase, the post 100 days phase of his second term.
Casey, despite all this criticism about Doge and the cuts to government spending, to jobs, etc., the fact of the matter is the U.S. national debt is approaching $37 trillion. Under the Biden administration, annual federal budget deficits surpassed $2 trillion. I think when you explain that to voters, they would say, yeah, we do need to cut back government spending. I think it's the way the Doge has approached it, maybe, that has some Americans concerned over it. What do you think there?
Yeah, I mean, he tried to move fast and cut things quickly. And it was, I think the problem is that there's not really the political will among Republicans to make major cuts. They love to tout these, smaller grants that are controversial and different things like that. But that's a very small percentage of the budget. And you could cut every single grant like that and not get rid of the deficit. So I don't think Republicans actually have the political will or backbone right now to make huge cuts that are needed to balance the budget. On top of that, Democrats have traditionally not wanted to make cuts. And there's a lot of Democrats and some Republicans who really don't believe that national debt is a problem. Sort of like a Keynesian view that you can take out debt, print money, it stimulates the economy. As long as the debt's reasonable, it's actually not really going to be a problem that comes back to haunt you. There's a lot of people who really believe that. And so you have some of that. And on top of that, the Democrats don't want Trump to get credit for cutting some of these good cuts, and they want to just advertise in mass the potential cuts he could make to things like Social Security. Musk made a fatal flaw, I think, of talking about, you could say it's a mistake of talking about the need to cut Social Security, and without maybe always being explicitly clear that he doesn't mean benefits, but maybe he did mean benefits. There's a lot of fraud, waste, fraud, and abuse in Social Security. The big entitlement programs are by far like the biggest problem when it comes to our national debt. And everybody wants to talk about, transgender operas and climate grants to build, windmills that aren't doing anything. But if you're not going to touch Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, or defense spending, you're not going to get the budget under control.
With Elon Musk announcing that he's going to step away, not completely, but in part, from his duties under the Trump administration in Washington, D.C. Do you think that the Doge effort is losing momentum?
It's lost momentum, but, it may be that I think that the Doge brand is oddly very strong even without Elon. And the thing is, there is generally among the American people a very strong support for cutting waste, fraud, and abuse. It's just when you get to, well, what about this specific program? They say, oh, well, not that one. Right. So people generally believe that they should have a budget and live within their means. But then when you say, hey, well, you're going to stop going out to eat so much, they're like, well, I don't know about that. And the same is true at the federal level. So I think because people generally support cuts, having a sort of institutionalized DOJ that is in charge of always finding waste, fraud, and abuse that lives beyond Elon could be part of Elon's legacy. It could be part of Trump's legacy. And I could see, Republicans supporting making that office permanent somehow. There is a congressional committee in the House that is called DOJ. It sort of has a different name, but it is the DOJ subcommittee. So I think it could be a really good idea for Republicans to try to make this permanent, to create something in DC that's always exposing the waste, fraud, and abuse without maybe quite so much drama.
Casey, thank you for joining us today. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com.
Big thanks to Dan and Casey. You're listening to the Center Square Radio Hour. I'm your host, Chris Krug. With more on the growth in drug spending from California's state healthcare program, it's Keegan Kernodle.
California reports that its drug spending has doubled since 2018, with a quarter of that increase coming from weight loss drugs and an unknown portion from illegal immigrants. With more on this is our California reporter, Kenneth Schrupp. Can you get into this?
Yeah, so drug spending for Medi-Cal, which is the state's taxpayer-funded healthcare program, has increased from $4 billion in fiscal year 2018-2019 to $8 billion for fiscal year 2023-2024. In the same period, Medi-Cal enrollment rose from 33% of the state population to 38.2% of the state population, or growth of about 15%. So where did the rest of that doubling come from? This new report from the state-funded Legislative Analyst Office does offer some insights. It says that 25% of that doubling has come from weight loss drugs like Ozempic. So nearly 2/3 of Californians are overweight or obese, and 40% of Californians on Medi-Cal are obese compared to 29% of the general population, which is in part attributed to lower income individuals often having more health issues and being more obese than the general population. So the report does note that the most of the increase has been from Ozempic, which is not a cheap drug. This list price for Ozempic is about $1,000 a dose, which is rather expensive. And for a large portion of the population, this spending isn't eligible for rebates. It's not eligible for federal reimbursements because illegal immigrants are ineligible to get these kind of federal payments, which means that taxpayers in California are funding a lot of the care, the entirety of the care and drugs for this population that only recently has gained coverage in Medi-Cal.
I see. And now it says that there's an unknown portion of drugs for illegal immigrants being covered. What does this mean?
What it means is that the state did not provide data or does not have data for the legislative analysts on the breakdown of how much spending is for illegal immigrants, at least when it comes to drug costs. What we have learned in earlier hearings is that as of earlier this year, the state had thus far spent $9.5 billion on healthcare for illegal immigrants. And I've also been told by Republican lawmakers that the state has told them that about half of the recent doubling in total Medi-Cal costs has come from expanding coverage eligibility to include all illegal immigrants. The state has steadily been expanding eligibility for the program over time. It first expanded eligibility to illegal immigrant children in 2016, illegal immigrant young adults up to 25 years old in 2020, illegal immigrants 50 and older in 2022, and then finally to all illegal immigrants in 2024. So this has resulted in vast expansion of the program to where, as I said earlier, about 40% of Californians are now covered by this program for low-income individuals.
I see. And what are people saying about these this doubling and the general sentiment around it?
Well, what we do know is that emergency rooms are swamped. Doctors are not really accepting more Medi-Cal patients in a manner that has caught up with the number of new patients and caseload that we have. This is because Medi-Cal reimbursement rates are very low, and this has come at the same time that we've created a new healthcare minimum wage where anybody who's tangentially in the healthcare sector, this includes a gift shop worker at a hospital, gets a much higher minimum wage. This is rising to $25 an hour. This is the cost that doctors have to pay for all of their staff. And with Medi-Cal reimbursement rates so low, taking on Medi-Cal patients could mean losing money on patients instead of even breaking even or making any kind of money to help cover overhead and other expenses that are very high in California. So Newsom has requested a $6.2 billion bailout for Medi-Cal just to supplement this year's ongoing spending because expenses are coming in higher than expected. This has led Republicans to request an audit of Medi-Cal because this is a program that a lot of Californians rely upon and have paid into for years. But suddenly we're finding that it's just impossible for a lot of people to get a doctor now. And the quality of care is not what it used to be.
Now, you mentioned this bailout from Newsom that he's requesting. That's for this year. What does this all mean going forward? Like, where do we go from here?
Well, it seems like the state does want to continue to expand eligibility and coverage and also increase payments to all of the providers who provide care, increase payments to people who work in the industry. All of this is leading to significant growth in the state budget. The state budget is not looking great for this year. Earlier reports show that sales tax and corporate tax revenue is projected to be down. This suggests underlying weakness in the economy. The state has lost hundreds of thousands of private sector jobs since 2022. All of the job growth has been in government supported sectors. A large portion of that growth has been through a specific Medi-Cal program called in-home supportive services, by which individuals who are elderly or disabled can pay household members part-time minimum wage to provide care for them. This is often stuff that family members have normally done for themselves because this is what people do. People take care of their family. And this has been counted as job growth. This is accounted for, I believe, about a third of the new government jobs in California in the last few years. So even that figure is grossly overstated. We have real underlying weakness in the economy. The latest jobs report shows that California has continued to lose jobs this month. So things are not looking good. We're losing probably a lot of federal funding due to non-compliance with federal orders. We are set up for a very rough year, and I don't think the state currently wants to cut any programs and cut any services, but that might be something that has to happen. There is a federal bill that would limit some of the federal funding going to Medi-Cal, but it's not clear if that would make much of a difference.
Well, thank you, Kenneth. I appreciate you breaking this down for us. Readers can keep up with this story and more as we continue to cover it at thecentersquare.com.
Thanks to Keegan and Kenneth for that update. After the break, we'll look at more top stories from across the nation. What is the DOJ bringing against Illinois for its sanctuary policies? Does Harvard have a case against the Trump administration? And will President Trump try to fire Fed Chair Jerome Powell? We'll have all that and more when we return on the Center Square Radio Hour. Welcome back to the Center Square Radio Hour. I'm Chris Krug. Here are this week's quick hits, some of the original reporting you may have missed at thecentersquare.com. A U.S. House Republican panel is recommending criminal charges against former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. The House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform on Monday sent a criminal referral letter asking attorney Pam Bondi to charge Cuomo with making false statements to Congress as part of an investigation into his administration's response to COVID-19 nursing home deaths in New York State. The panel's chairman, Representative James Comer, a Republican from Kentucky, called Cuomo, quote, a man with a history of corruption and deceit, unquote. And he said he was, quote, caught red-handed lying to Congress, unquote. 8 petroleum-based synthetic food dyes must be phased out of the American food supply and medications within the next year, according to U.S. Food and Drug Administration Commissioner Martin McCary. The dyes commonly used in ultra-processed foods are blue 1, blue 2, green 3, red 40, yellow 5, yellow 6, citrus red, and orange B. McCary echoed concerns from some health groups that petroleum-based dyes are correlated with several health conditions in children, including ADHD, obesity, diabetes, cancer, and allergic reactions. The FDA will revoke authorization of citrus red and orange B within the coming weeks. The food industry has until the end of 2025 to transition the other 6 synthetic food dyes listed to natural alternatives. The Trump administration is giving New York another month to shut down its congestion pricing program after the state blew past the Sunday deadline to halt the controversial tolling plan. In a letter to Governor Kathy Hochul, Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy gave the state until May 21st to dismantle the tolling system or risk losing federal funding and approvals for certain projects from the Federal Highway Administration. The program was supposed to stop by March 21st, but the Department of Transportation extended it to April 20th, and Sunday's deadline came and went with the tolling system still in place. Taking video footage of military bases using a drone could land some in legal hot water if proposed bipartisan legislation becomes law. The Drone Espionage Act would update the Espionage Act of 1917, criminalizing drone video footage of sensitive national defense sites, punishable by fine, 10 years of imprisonment, or both. It is illegal to take photos of national defense sites. However, it fails to mention video, leaving sites vulnerable to foreign adversaries. The representatives say there have been a rise in drones being used by countries such as China to capture video footage of sensitive U.S. sites. The Republican majority in the Arizona legislature Monday criticized Democratic Governor Katie Hobbs' decision to veto a law designed to ensure cooperation between local law enforcement and federal immigration authorities. The AZ ICE Act would have prohibited state government entities from adopting or enforcing any policies that block or restrict law enforcement from cooperating with federal authorities enforcing immigration laws. You can find more on these stories and others like them from across the country at thecentersquare.com. We'll be right back with more on the Center Square Radio Hour.
Teacher Lauren Johnson returned all the graded essays but one. He believed that one student was capable of more.
I don't believe taking the middle of the road is your philosophy. This time, write something you really believe.
The student wrote a new one about excellence. Instead of just grading an essay, Mr. Johnson changed a life. I am that student. I became a writer, and I wrote this to thank him.
Thank a teacher and pass it on from passiton.com.
Welcome back to the Center Square Radio Hour. I'm Chris Krug. With more on the conflict between the DOJ and the state of Illinois, it's Dan McCaleb.
In court filings related to the Trump administration's challenge of Illinois and Chicago's sanctuary policies, the Department of Justice cited examples of how those impede immigration officials from doing their job to protect the public safety. Joining me to discuss this is the Center Square's Illinois editor, Greg Bishop. Greg, you reported on the filing this week. Tell us about those examples.
So the back and forth over the state's sanctuary policies for non-citizens in federal courts between the U.S. Department of Justice and the Trump administration and the state of Illinois, Cook County, and the city of Chicago. And the most recent filing that the DOJ put in was a statement of facts supporting their motion for summary judgment against Illinois' migrant sanctuary policies. And they gave an example of as recent as January, an illegal alien was being held in the Cook County jail, and because Illinois law prevented Cook County jailers from cooperating or communicating with the ICE officials, immigration officials, the individual was released from jail, and then the DOJ says that illegal alien was arrested elsewhere, 17 days later accused of murder. That's just one of the examples that they gave. They gave two other examples of illegal aliens in jail for abusing a minor, allegedly, and then being let out and being arrested again for another instance of abusing a minor. And they also discussed how they've been to Illinois prisons in the parking lots wanting to pick up illegal aliens being released, but were told by local officials to leave the premises. So these were several examples that the DOJ gave in their statement of facts supporting a motion for summary judgment. Now, I asked the governor earlier this week, he was at an unrelated event here in Jacksonville in central Illinois, and I asked him about how, with those examples the DOJ is providing, how is it that the state's migrant sanctuary policies aren't impacting public safety? And the governor simply reverted back to what he's said before, even before Trump was elected, that he wants violent criminal non-citizens deported. But he said that the DOJ has to get a federal criminal warrant, and the state does not honor federal civil detainers for non-citizens. So the case continues, Dan. This is something that obviously has got national attention. It was among the first actions that U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi took to hold Illinois to account for the Trust Act, which prohibits local and state police from cooperating with federal immigration officials, and Illinois' Way Forward Act that took that a step forward and prohibited local officials from even allowing for non-citizens to be in local county jail beds. So clearly, the fight's not over. You have the state. They filed a motion to dismiss, and in their most recent response to the state and the courts about looking for a schedule for discovery and for briefings, the state said that the DOJ has not made their case yet, and they're asking for the overall situation to be put on hold until the court deals with their motion to dismiss. So, Dan, as we see a lot of times when it comes to the courts, it's legal wrangling and scheduling and potential delays. It's going to be a long time, I think, before this issue actually gets resolved by the federal courts.
Well, I agree with you there. Republicans in the state of Illinois have called on the governor, the state, the city of Chicago, Cook County, to get rid of those sanctuary policies, calling them illegal and a threat to public safety. But Governor Pritzker and Mayor Brandon Johnson in Chicago and others are steadfast that those policies will remain in place despite the Trump's Department of Justice going after them.
Yeah, and part of the rationale that we heard, even when these policies were debated years ago and enacted years ago, supporters say that they don't want non-citizens in the state who may be victims of crime being apprehensive about reporting those crimes. So they wanted to make sure police weren't asking for an individual's immigration status. But when you get down to it and you see these examples from the DOJ, and it's not just in Illinois, the Lake and Riley Act passed. That's another thing the DOJ pointed to being enacted that includes a whole host of different crimes that if illegal aliens are, being held for those, they should be able to have access to those individuals. ICE should be able to detain those individuals. The Lake and Riley Act passed Congress and was signed by the president. And the DOJ says that's just another instance here where Illinois is not cooperating and indeed impeding and obstructing federal immigration officials. The rationale of we want to make sure that non-citizens can report crimes without the threat of being deported. I don't know how that goes up against those examples of an illegal alien being arrested for a crime like vehicle theft and then being released from a jail without ICE being notified, and then they get arrested later for a murder. The governor, he said, listen, he wants violent criminals out as well. And I asked if there needs to be more clarity in the law to allow for better cooperation in such instances. And Pritzker defaulted back to saying all they need to do is get a criminal detention warrant, and they should be able to access the jails. I believe all of this is going to come out in court documents with possibly even more examples, because the laws are still in place, even as the courts handle this case. And clearly, we will have that debate in the court eventually. Just when is the big question here.
And listeners can keep up with any updates on this story at thecentersquare.com.
Thank you, Dan and Greg. You're listening to the Center Square Radio Hour. I'm your host, Chris Krug. With more on Harvard's lawsuit against the Trump administration, it's Eliana Kernodle.
After seeing billions of dollars in research funding frozen and facing multiple federal demands for internal reform, Harvard University is suing the Trump administration under the claim that it has violated the school's First Amendment rights. Joining me to dig into this is reporter for the Center Square, Therese Boudreau. Therese, could you lay out this lawsuit for us?
Yeah, so Harvard is suing the Trump administration, as you said, over what they say is a violation of their First Amendment rights, because they're saying that the Trump administration, by using federal funding as leverage to try to push them towards certain speech or certain things. Like, for instance, Trump administration wants them to crack down on any programs or classes that are anti-Semitic or otherwise discriminatory. On student behavior, that's the same thing. So Harvard is saying that by using leverage to push Harvard to do these things, that their free speech and their freedom of expression is effectively they're being coerced, that their First Amendment rights are being taken away because there's this whole money question. There's, $2.2 billion in funding, that the Department of Education took away. They're also saying in the lawsuit that there are some procedural things as well that the Trump administration neglected. Basically, they say presidents are only supposed to withhold federal funding, or administrations rather, only supposed to hold federal funding as a last resort. And so the Harvard president was saying that, look, we're trying to crack down on anti-Semitism. We know we have work to do, but they're doing some investigations. They're trying to get a handle on it. And they say that the Trump administration is acting too fast and is trying to use this as an excuse to control what the university says, what it teaches, what the people there are doing. So that's kind of where we're at right now.
And you mentioned comments made by the Harvard president, Alan Garber, and he has made a statement on the subject. Can you get a little bit more into what he's said?
Yeah. So again, when Harvard filed the lawsuit, he released a statement saying that this is an attack on the character, the freedom of Harvard University. And he said that we as Harvard University are not going to let this administration or any other administration push us around or tell us what to teach or how to teach it. Again, he did emphasize that they are trying to crack down on anti-Semitism. They're actually going to be releasing a report on both anti-Semitism and anti-Israeli sentiments and anti-Palestinian sentiments from what's happening on campus, that kind of stuff. So he says he is committed to cracking down on it, but he is suing the Trump administration because, he thinks that this is an example of a broader crackdown on, the higher educational institutions in the U.S. by the Trump administration so that they will root out, diversity, equity, inclusion policies or teaching or, anti-Semitic things, other discriminatory, Title IX kind of stuff. So he's holding fast to that. Besides the funding, taking away the $2.2 billion in funding, Trump administration, they've also directed the IRS to examine the school's tax exempt status, which would be huge. And some other things as well. The Department of Homeland Security also rescinded a couple million in grants that were being used at Harvard to research. Forget exactly what it was, but basically DHS said you were just researching things that are discriminatory or DEI or useless, and we're not going to give you federal dollars for that. So it's an evolving issue, and it doesn't look like Harvard's going to back down anytime soon, but it also doesn't look like the administration's going to back down anytime soon. So we'll see what happens there.
Yeah. And any idea on what we can expect going forward?
There are no signs that either Trump administration or Harvard is going to back down anytime soon. The Trump administration recently released some executive orders that kind of compounding on what he's doing with Harvard and a couple other schools. He released one last night or evening that would stiffen the penalties for schools that don't report gifts from foreign sources, which the Trump administration says, hey, that's one thing that's been influencing all of these anti-America or DEI, propaganda on our campuses and things like that. Also a couple of executive orders that change the college accreditation process, and ones that all of these oriented towards rooting out, DEI, discrimination, whether racially or culturally or otherwise. So this is ongoing. This is bigger than just Harvard. Harvard right now is holding fast to what they want to teach, but the Trump administration certainly is not done. They keep moving forward on rooting out these policies and trying to crack down on, what they see as woke or, discriminatory speech and actions on campuses.
Well, Therese, thank you for your insights on this story. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com.
Thank you, Eliana and Therese. You're listening to the Center Square Radio Hour. I'm your host, Chris Krug. Join me to discuss the back and forth between President Trump and Fed Chair Jerome Powell. It's PhD economist Dr. Orphe Dibangi.
There's been a lot of contention and a lot of guessing around President Trump and the future of Fed Chairman Jerome Powell. Some banter back and forth. Certainly, the president trying to flex some muscles. He came out today and said, I have no intention whatsoever, and that's a direct quote, of firing Jerome Powell. The markets have not enjoyed the sparring over who is the Fed chairman, and hasn't seemed to react too terribly well to President Trump's recommendations that Powell reduce rates. And certainly, a lot of people would like the idea of lower rates, but Jerome Powell's not one of them. And
I don't know if Jerome Powell has an opinion about whether rates should be higher or lower. I think Jerome Powell is very much data dependent, and that what he's seeing is, as just as well as other members of the FOMC, what they're seeing is, all this uncertainty about tariffs, the idea that potentially tariffs could actually be inflationary, that if you have an increase in price level, and then you have some retaliation from a foreign country and more retaliation and back and forth, the price of goods could continue to increase and cause inflation to pick up again. If consumers begin to suspect that prices are going to be higher in the future, they go out and spend more, and that puts upward pressure on prices even more. If inflation expectations get kind of unanchored, then you have a problem. And if, of course, you have an inflation problem, what you end up with is a Fed that can't cut because their hands are tied, right? And so I think that's important. That's an important clarification, that essentially the president would like the Fed to cut interest rates, but that his own tariff policy could be preventing the Fed from cutting interest rates. And so there lies the issue.
I don't think you're wrong. I mean, and ultimately, the Fed chairman forms an opinion based on data. So he's not just sitting around looking out the window, and if it rains, it's a yes. And if it doesn't rain, it's a no.
I think Powell was very much, dovish. Like, remember, he came out when we had a slow month in the labor market last year. Inflation was easing, but still higher than target. The Fed chair came out and rallied the troops to cut interest rates. And they did cut. They kept cutting until December, even though most people thought they should not be cutting in December because inflation had remained somewhat consistently.
But let's wind the clock. All right, time out though. Let's wind the clock all the way back. I mean, there was an opportunity to cut earlier in the year. In fact, if memory serves me, heading into 2024, there was a tremendous amount of optimism that there would be. I mean, there were some analysts that were suggesting that we might see 6 cuts in 2024. I think we wound up getting 3, and we had none until we got into July.
That's right. But he was right. I mean, you look in retrospect, the labor market was holding up pretty well. Inflation still well above target. And when I say easing, but well above target. And then he cut, right? I should say the Fed cut. And then, and the Fed cut despite the fact that inflation was no longer really moving fast towards the 2% target. And so to me, that was a Fed that was really leaning into rate cuts in the year ahead. And ultimately what stopped the Fed from cutting further was the tariff situation and the uncertainty surrounding the impact that tariffs would have on the inflation side.
What's in the data right now, though? I mean, that Jerome Powell would be looking at. Like, I mean, we've had, and I'm gonna just go back because this is really interesting, right? And I'm just looking at two stories just to keep it like kind of in the same square, written by CNBC, who they draw a lot of, they obviously they draw a lot of mainstream attention, right? I mean, in terms of business news, I mean, they would be in, I would suspect the top 5 sources in the United States in terms of business news. And I think that they're probably about as mainstream as it gets. So on Monday, they have a story and with a quote, and it was actually a quote of a tweet. And he says, this is Trump writing this. He says, with these costs trending so nicely downward, he's talking about inflation, right? Just what I predicted they would do. There can be almost no inflation, but there can be a slowing of the economy, unless Mr. Too Late, a major loser, lowers interest rates now. And so he's referring to Jerome Powell there. And then so that's Monday afternoon. And then Tuesday, just to kind of set this straight, whatever run that Trump was on, as in terms of thinking about like sort of, what was in front of him and on his mind on Monday. He said very specifically today, he has no intention of firing Jerome Powell, none whatsoever. And he never did. And so, how does this resolve?
Honestly, I have no idea. I think what you need is basically, and, I can't talk about what policy should look like in Washington, D.C. That's not my job. I'm an economist. But here's the thing. Inflation, annualized, by, looking at the PCE price index, 3.6% last month. On a year-over-year basis, 2.5%. Oh, by the way, ticked slightly higher last month. And so you just can't, in that environment, you can't be talking about rate cuts when you have the potential for inflation ratcheting up the price level and potentially causing consumers to go out and buy a bunch of stuff ahead of further tariff retaliation. So you just can't. Unfortunately, you can't. It's not an environment that is, with the Fed can't look at inflation numbers right now. I feel confident that we're going to go in the right direction after a rate cut.
Appreciate your thoughts as always, Dr. O. That'll do it for another week of the Center Square Radio Hour. If you missed some of today's show, you can find it wherever you find podcasts. I'm Chris Krug on behalf of everyone at Franklin News Foundation. Thank you for listening to the Center Square Radio Hour.